So just wanted to welcome everyone back for the third and final day of the University of Minnesota Extension's fifth annual Pollinator Webinar Series. It's really hard to believe that we've already reached the end of this year's series. It goes by so quickly every year. So a lot of planning that goes into it, but I'm super happy that it's all gone off without a hitch so far. So I am super excited for today's presentation because we have several University of Minnesota Extension Master Gardeners and an Extension educator and a Master Gardener leader who will be sharing real world examples and applications of all the things that we've learned about how to conserve and create pollinator to habitat. So, this session is really about seeing what's possible, how ideas just really turn into action. So, before we get into the presentation, I'd like to recognize our wonderful extension team again. So, here with us today is Quincy Sadowski, extension educator in Benton, Morrison, and Sherburne counties, and myself, Tara Young, extension educator in Hubbard County. So, just like the last 2 days, a quick reminder on how we'll interact today on a Zoom webinar format. If you have questions for our presenters, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'll only be pulling questions from there. So if you have any questions or any comments or reflections that you have, feel free to just use the chat down below. So all presentations are being recorded and we'll be emailing out all the recordings out in the resource email this Friday. So that gives me some time to do the edits and just make sure everything is good before sending out the email on Friday. So expect to see that in your inboxes then. That email will also include all the links shared through the series. There are so many great resources, and so it's just the nicest package to just make sure that you easily can find them again, all in one spot. So one more important note. So when today's webinar ends and we close the webinar, your browser will just automatically open up to the survey. It's just a really quick 5-question survey that just really helps us shape future program in pollinators. So as a special thank you for anyone who fills out that survey, you'll be entered to win one of two $25 Visa gift cards as a special thank you for filling that out and giving your feedback. So, and all the details will also be included in Friday's resource email. So if you don't see that survey for some reason, it'll all be there. So now I am happy to introduce today's speakers. We'll start with Jillian Patry, an extension educator in Clay County who works closely with the Clay County Master Gardeners, including Sydney Stock. We'll also hear from Cap Wilkies, a Carlton County Master Gardener, along with Sally McNamara and Sue Light from the Dakota County Master Gardener Group. So each group will be highlighting projects in their local communities and then answering your burning questions when it comes to how does this actually take place? What do we actually do? So we'll begin with Jillian and Sydney. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Everyone can hear me okay, I'm hoping.
Yes.
All right, so yes, like Tara said, I'm the extension educator in Clay County, and I also help support the Clay County Master Gardeners here. And we'll be talking about our Gooseberry Park Pollinator Project, which has stemmed from FM Flutterfest. So we'll be embarking on our second year of FM Flutterfest this year, which is going to be, it's just a community-wide program and events that will all circle around pollinator health, pollinator habitat, and just helping communities make those spaces. All right, so we'll see how this works. There we go. All right, why? We'll start there. So why did we start this project in Clay County? I'll introduce her, I think, in the next slide, but we had, she was an intern this last year, and now she's an active member, Martha Wheeler. And she came to our group really excited about pollinators and wanting to educate people about pollinators. So we were brainstorming, so we have a small group of people who've been brainstorming this idea, Sydney included. About how we could do that. So we wanted to do pollinator education. We wanted to do some habitat restoration. we wanted public engagement as well. And then we all kind of encapsulated this into our Moorhead is in Clay County. And our Moorhead has a Mayor's Monarch Pledge. So I don't know if anyone's heard of that or if your city is involved in that, but it's a National Wildlife Federation signatory, and you can read the sentence down there. What is that? But Moorhead um, has engaged in numerous initiatives over the past several years to preserve the monarch habitat, including the passage of natural lawn ordinances, planting demonstration gardens, and at different city-owned buildings and parks, revising the mosquito spraying approval process, and et cetera, et cetera. So our city has taken this as high importance. So this this project and then also Flutterfest kind of fit into that. Here's Martha. She's on today. She is kind of the brainchild and the one that really wanted to do this project and is spearheading, this next year's events and programming. So to start, we had to kind of figure out key partners. So how is this going to work? Because I'm sure if you've worked within a group or you want to do something in a public space, you have to have buy-in from those people, maybe who are in charge of that public space. Especially in our location, our public, our city parks and recreation, has a minimal budget. So they don't have a bunch of staff to take care of anything new or added. So we wanted to make sure that we were partnering with them and that we were making sure that they felt comfortable with us doing this project in a city park. So we worked closely with the city of Moorhead Parks and Rec, and they allowed us to do this planting and actually do some cleanup in other parts of the park as well, in addition to putting in this pollinator habitat as too. And then we had community partners who helped us out with this. So with funding, and for FM Flutterfest, we had an event. So we had our Soil and Water District come. We had our Minnesota Women in Conservation come, the Northwest chapter. So we just had a lot of other public and community partners help us with organizing this event. So we went out to the park to kind of decide what are we gonna do, because there was 3 separate spots where we could potentially put in plants. We settled on this area in the picture. So if you can see, kind of in the background is a shelter with picnic tables, and then behind this picture, so if you were looking behind who we were taking this picture, is a playground. So this is kind of it's a public space where a lot of traffic is. This is a pretty popular park in Moorhead. A lot of great walking trails and nice landscape. There's some biking trails down further along. If you keep looking past the tree row back there, the Red River is back there. So a lot of recreation. So this space had a bench already, and we were thinking, well, how can we revamp this and clean it up, and then maybe add some plants in there that were going to create a habitat for pollinators. There were some plants in there already, you can see, daylilies, and that's kind of the majority of our parks in Moorhead is daylilies, because they're an easy add. So we were just thinking, well, how can we make this place a little more pollinator friendly? So we thought about an observation area because it had the bench already. So this is a space we chose. And then we were kind of putting in some different plants in there. On the left, you can see kind of our hand-drawn design. And we wrote in some plants that we thought about putting in there. And this was all in collaboration too with Parks and Recreation, just making sure they were comfortable with us doing this project as we went along planning. So from this project stemmed FM Flutterfest, which is now going to be in its 2nd year, like I mentioned. And so we wanted to bring in the educational part as well, in conjunction with this planting. So we decided to have an event. It was in the evening, open to the public. We had a bunch of different activities. So this was a really fun way to get people engaged and come to this event and help out and just be aware of what we were trying to do in this space. So attendees could make bee homes. They helped with the planting. We did a tree walk and talk with a Minnesota master naturalist who is in Fargo, so local. Sydney read pollinator stories. We had some books donated. Um, we also planted coneflowers with whoever wanted to. They can bring it home with them. We had music, and then we had food and all kinds of other fun things that people like when they go to events. And these are just some pictures of how we prepped it. So there was landscape fabric already underneath this mulched area that had the daylilies in it. So instead of ripping that all out, we decided we would try to do this drill method. So we cut away the landscape fabric where we're going to put our plugs. We used a drill. Sydney's in the picture doing the hard labor. We drilled the holes, and actually worked pretty well. And then we added some more dirt around all the plugs and new mulch as well. These are just more pictures. It was great to have the kids and their parents be involved in it. I think they really liked that aspect of it. Get the kids in the dirt. And then once we were finished, you can still see the daylilies obviously are bigger than the new plants, but they did establish quite quickly. Along with that event, we wanted to make sure people could still, find resources. So in that spot, we put up a sign. On the sign, there's 4 different steps on how you could support pollinators at home. One is just make a habitat. 2 is reduce your pesticide use. Connect with organizations that can help you establish a pollinator garden. And then, yeah, just more resources. So the QR code, you can scan it and will bring you to a document that we had that we just have other links to other resources for people to find, and then use. So this is a picture later in the fall. I think this was August, maybe. Martha took these pictures. So we put in hyssop, that's what you can see there. We put in prairie smoke, we put in liatris, we put in some blue stem and prairie drop seed, butterfly flower. Just kind of started with some specific plants to begin with, because this is going to be an ongoing project. But we had some visitors. Martha took some pictures too. So we had a lot of bumblebees. We even had some fun little ladybugs who I think were eating aphids actually on this. So we saw a lot of benefit right away in the very first couple months, basically. We planted this in June of last year. So at the end of the project, we were trying to think of what else we can do so we can keep this going. So next year we're going to do another Flutterfest with some more events and hopefully some more installations. One of the ideas was to install a soft landing. I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then Martha, too, she loves everything that Doug Tellamy has to say about pollinator support, and we actually will have him speaking in Moorhead next year, or well, coming up in June, on pollinators too. So that's going to be super exciting, and hopefully we'll engage lots more people into this movement. So these are just pictures of other future areas we're hoping to clean up and expand potentially. We did get word recently that they are going to put in a new playground. So we will have to kind of shift where we wanted to do some plantings because of that construction, but we're still hopeful that we can do that this coming year. So soft landings, if you don't know what those are, it's a living mulch of native shade plants that would provide habitat or overwintering sites, food protection for pollinators and wildlife. And a lot of this is done underneath like a signature tree or a keystone planting, like a service berry or something, um, and just somewhere for insects to have shelter as well as food too. We had a fun opportunity too this October. We were able to be part of the crowdfunding project that Master Gardeners does. So they help Master Gardener groups raise money towards projects. So we were able to raise almost $500 to continue our work at the local parks. Hopefully, we can keep expanding and keep going in all the parks. So that was really awesome. And yeah, I didn't talk about maintenance, but the park facilities let us use the water on site, so we were able to water. But I don't think we had to do a whole lot because it rained a lot this summer, so that was really helpful. But yeah, Martha and Crystal, she was in one of the pictures. They would check on the garden periodically. Sydney, maybe you were out. We would all kind of stop out and just see how everything was going. So, with that, Sydney, did you want to add anything? And if you do, and then we can take questions.
Sure, yeah. I was just gonna give a little bit more context, like around some of the history of these sorts of pocket prairies, in Moorhead. It's like Tara was saying, in the last like 5 or so years, this has become super popular for good reason. So from 2021 to 2022, I served as a Minnesota Green Corps member in the Moorhead area. And during that time, we coordinated the creation of three separate pocket prairies in three different city parks that were very similar to the one that we did in Gooseberry, all of which were located in spaces that were super densely populated. So folks were able to go out and observe and enjoy them like every day, see them, check on them, sort of stewarding them was the idea. And we did that in collaboration with Moorhead's Community Education to make the creation of the pocket prairies a sort of like summer camp experience. And we had to work closely with the city of Moorhead. We were working with Public Works for those projects as opposed to Moorhead Parks and Rec. So the whole city of Moorhead interworkings are very familiar with our passion for pocket prairies, whether they like it or not. And also the city sustainability coordinator at the time, who was Crystal, who's in that picture with me planting, along with like tons and tons of other community partners. So what Jill was saying with all of those partnerships is like the major key, I would say, to establishing a really successful space outside of, having all the knowledge to plant and things like that. That was a project that we really wanted to continue and expand and create more pocket prairies throughout the city, except we weren't granted like a second year to continue that like Green Corps work with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So I kind of pivoted a couple years later and joined the Master Gardener program, and was really excited to pursue native planting, more prairie restoration. So when Martha proposed the idea of an event that took place during Pollinator Week, we would be able to create another pollinator garden. That was really exciting. And I think that we can just all agree that these sorts of projects are really important for community building, just in general, but also expanding knowledge about the importance of natives and creating spaces for pollinators and wildlife. And I think an event like Flutterfest that can recur every year is a really good outlet and way to do that. So we're really excited to keep going. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill and Sydney. That's amazing. And really being in the Fargo-Moorhead area, you're kind of at a disadvantage for two reasons. You're in northern Minnesota, which have all the implications with that, as well as you're in an urban setting. So then you have a lot of conflicting, opinions and things that you have to balance. So very challenging. So I'm so glad you were able to show us this. And it's I mean, this is a pretty young project. So I think we're kind of going from younger to older in this presentation. So it's really nice for folks to see that are just starting of like, this is what the initial startup takes. And then like, this is the first few years. It's not going to be perfect, but it's what we have. So I do have some questions that are in the chat. So, do you know, did the city have any insurance concerns? This user had talked about our city parks department had required we secure separate insurance for gardening efforts.
I think we just operated under the Master Gardener
Mm,
University insurance. Because anything that you do as a Master Gardener, if it's a program, that that kind of covers it, basically. Um, some of the activities, we did have people sign waivers. We did a buckthorn removal as well. So we wanted to make sure those people had kind of liability waivers. But no, we didn't have to get any other insurance that I'm aware of.
good.
Yeah.
One less thing to think about. Uh, so, do you feel that the ongoing maintenance of these plantings is doable for the park staff going forward?
So that was the big thing. They wanted to make sure that they weren't going to have to be the ones to maintain. So Master Gardeners has essentially adopted this garden, and we are responsible for maintaining it. So that was the big sell. Like I mentioned at the beginning, they're pretty stretched thin, so anything that's an addition, they want to have those organizations be responsible for it. And they've certainly had concerns because they had been, if you want to say, burned before with projects. But I think it helps too that Master Gardeners has, a lot of membership, a lot of volunteers. It's not really one single person who's in charge either. It's kind of a group effort. It certainly helps to have the university behind it in a sense. Um, but yeah, that was a big thing. So in our situation, our group has adopted this garden and is taking care of all the maintenance.
That's awesome. They're very lucky to have you, though, as a master gardener, leader, extension educator. So they have some connection with, the possibilities.
Well, right, and two, yeah, they have an educator in the county that can help too if something happens. So
Mhm.
it's good.
So, are you guys worried about leaving the weed barrier in the landscape fabric? Do you think that will impact pollinators that are ground nesting?
We thought about that. And in that specific spot, it was so ingrown and it had been there so long that it was just not feasible to take it out. Ideally, yeah, we wouldn't have landscape fabric. And I think that's the other locations we were looking at. Some of them didn't have landscape fabric, but ideally you wouldn't put landscape fabric down because of that concern, where some of the pollinators were trying to support do burrow into the dirt um, to overwinter or nest or lay eggs. If I'm trying to remember, but some of the landscape fabric was like not intact necessarily anymore. It had been there so long.
It's
But in some
definitely
spots,
degraded in some
yeah.
spaces.
Yeah. So we're it wasn't a perfect space, but I think it'll work for what we're trying to start at least. Yeah.
Very nice. Do you know anything about a huge monarch die-off that was due to the overhead spraying of
Yes.
mosquitoes at all?
This was the reason the mayor's monarch pledge happened, right, Sydney? Yeah, because of that. Yep. And that's why, at least on the Moorhead side, there's been a lot of pushback from community members on spraying. This year we had a lot of community voice on aerial spraying and even just fogging, where actually quite a few of the spraying events were postponed or canceled because of community concerns
Wow.
stemming from that monarch massacre that happened. Yeah.
At least we can grow from it. Yeah, grow from
Yeah,
bad
yeah.
times.
Right. We're trying to, yeah, just look to the bright side or look to the future.
It has definitely, obviously devastating, but it's definitely created a greater awareness in the area for like the importance of native plantings like this, and has sometimes been like, well, we want to bring those monarchs back, so let's do more for them, which is the bright side, I suppose, if you can find that.
Well, right, too. Just exactly, Sydney. It's a terrible thing that happened, but people were so impacted by it that they are just so much more passionate about preventing that from happening that, yeah, voices are strong. Mhm.
Great. I think this is one question that I'll probably be asking all of the groups is what pushback ideas did you find? Is it messy or there's stinging insects that are buzzing around?
Yeah, we didn't have too much well, maybe Martha or Sydney heard, or even Crystal. I think it was more about the maintenance. Who's going to take care of this? That was probably the major pushback. Um, but we've certainly had that concern at some of our elementary sites that we have pollinator gardens at, concerns about stinging insects, but not too much at this site. I don't recall. Mostly it was who's going to take care of this? That was the biggest pushback. Yeah.
Yeah,
And in
it
order,
helps that there were like daylilies and things like that in that space a while ago. So it was a garden at one point, and it's pretty close to the playground. And that proved that like that was an okay space for them to be in.
that's awesome. Um, is, and this is an interesting question, is there an interstate communication for the coordination to protect and sustain plants, animals, and insects?
You mean like between North Dakota and Minnesota?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean North Dakota, at least for sure, like Fargo Park District, they have a monarch tagging event every year, and they do a lot of pollinator education and restoration of habitat. NDSU has a lot of pollinator education. We're hoping that we labeled it as FM, Flutterfest, Fargo Moorhead, so that it's kind of a, yeah, joint community across the river, interstate um, event that hopefully as we keep expanding that we can have, multi-location events through the whole week of Pollinator Fest. So, yeah.
This is a great opportunity to like spread that information if anyone is from the Fargo Moorhead area or just
Mhm.
wanting to vacation up there and do something fun. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
come vacation in Parkmore.
Yeah. Maybe one last question is what do you know what pesticide was used with the Monarch massacre?
I don't know. I think you can maybe look that up on city records, but it's like they hire out a company who sprays, so I'm not sure.
So you're offsetting by doing this project, hopefully, to continue growing and kind of get back what you
Yeah.
probably used to have. Well, I think that's everything. Oh, maybe this is another question. Would you please share a list of organizations invited and the activities that took place at Flutterfest?
Yeah, we can do that.
Perfect.
Mhm.
I think this is a great growing experience, whether you are a master gardener joining us or just a private citizen, I guess, just to see how much work it goes in to taking all these different contributions for a local project. So I think we'll get on to our next group, but I'm sure as people have more questions, we can always return back to Jill and Sydney. But so now we'll shift and we'll do Cap's presentation with Cap Wilkie in Carlton County.
Great. Thank you, Tara. Hello, all, and thank you for the opportunity to be sharing our story. I'm a Carlton County Master Gardener volunteer, also a beekeeper. Our pollinator garden is located at the Carlton County Fairgrounds in Barnum, and our gardens were created and are maintained by community organizations and volunteers. By sharing with you a bit, one of my hopes today is to highlight 3 ideas that I think are important for an opportunity for communities to create pollinator habitat in their areas. One is that I think I'm going to try to make the case that it's really important that all project partners get something out of having a pollinator garden. The second is that a garden team benefits a bit from having some organizational structure, and that engaging our communities requires a bit of effort, as you could definitely hear from Jillian's presentation just a second ago. The project at our fairground was kicked off in 2022, so 3 summers ago. Each of the partner organizations benefit from this project. The easiest one to identify is that we all have a common goal of increasing pollinator habitat. So the beekeepers were thinking about the bees, the gardeners were thinking about the plants and the flowers, the soil and water conservation district was thinking about stewardship, and the fairgrounds were happy about having a part of their grounds improved and cared for. So it's really been a win-win-win-win kind of a project. We have 2 gardens at the fairgrounds, a meadow and a rain garden. And I'll show you the meadow in the first half of this presentation and then jump back to 2022 to show you the rain garden. This is what our meadow looked like when the Carlton County Fair Board started partnering with us. And again, it was 2022 that we kicked off this project. And you can see that this part of the fairground is pretty nondescript, right? Isn't totally ugly, but it's also not very interesting. So our project made this corner of the fairgrounds quite lovely, I think, as you'll see, and has also reduced the amount of work for the fairground crew. To prepare the meadow, I want to tell a little bit about our how-to over the next few slides. We did spray with glyphosate to set back the grass. We added compost. We had a design for the path with a weed mat and wood chips. And then for the planting, we spread Soil and Water Conservation District meadow and songbird seed pack mixes that included native flowers, grasses, and sedges. This picture was taken in early summer of 2023. So the garden had been growing a year. The plants grew pretty well through the summer, but we didn't have many blooms in this first year. So our garden team focused on watering and weeding to support those young plants. Together as a garden team, we developed a list of specific plants that we were monitoring, and we're removing them during this first year, like nettle and thistle, bird's foot trefoil, dandelion, mustard, mullein, tansy. And these are the things that were not in the seed mix. So if we could identify it as one of those kind of common, not preferred plants in our meadow, we removed it that first year. And so this is a picture of year 2. The growth was pretty robust in 2024, and Fair Week is in August. And this Rudbeckia Black-Eyed Susan really put on a show for us in 2024. Other plants that were growing well, but weren't really blooming yet in the second year, they weren't blooming in abundance, but you could see that they were coming, was the Monarda, or the bee balm, stiff flower, sunflower, achillea, the yarrow, columbine, goldenrod. We had aster coming in, mountain mint, and echinacea or coneflower. Through this second year, the garden team continued to monitor the meadow, removing the nettle and mustard, trefoil, dandelions. It's a mullein that came in, tansy. Especially in the path, we're keeping that close, tidy too. And as a team, we established some simple organization for us. We had one person taking the lead and getting us organized. They set up a shared document with a simple volunteer calendar to sign up for specific weeks of the summer to tend the gardens. And we used a group chat to give updates on our individual efforts and share pictures. And we passed on suggestions that maybe we would pass on to each other to highlight something that needed tending to. I think I moved forward once. Here we go. So still in year 2, we were getting ourselves organized. And that text chat was really great because we could say, hey, I got this part of the garden, the meadow looked over, but this other half still needs some attention. We also kept each other updated on rainfall levels. And so besides monitoring for weeds, we were, if needed, we would spend some time watering. So this is the 3rd year growth. This past summer, we really saw the Monarda come into its own. We had a wonderful showing of this for our fair in mid-August, and you can see the difference. So in the year 2 August bloomings for the fair, it was just black-eyed Susans across the whole meadow. And then in 25, it was this Monarda who just took the show. And you can see how the path on the right side picture is the plants were 4, 5, 6 feet tall. So we had to push back the plants so people could even shoulder themselves through the garden. And again, we had many plants that are coming along but haven't yet really established themselves enough to be blooming. So a few of the asters were blooming, but you could tell much more was coming. The columbine was coming along, but isn't huge showing. We had some liatris, the meadow blazing star, that there was a few blooming, but you could tell there was a lot more plants. So 2026 will be a very lovely year to see what's really coming along. Again, our garden team met in early summer, and we set up our calendar and agreed on some garden tasks for the year. We also met again in person in the fall to celebrate and debrief on some areas to concentrate on for next year. For example, we had some deer browse in this past spring, so we came up with a way to set up deer fencing to keep those deer out over the winter and spring. Another less obvious task that our garden team took on was to keep our partner organizations up to date. So we provided updates to both our Carlton County Master Gardeners and the Northeast Minnesota Honeybee Association. We also had one of us designated to interact with our Carlton County Fair Board. And then we provided updates to the Carlton County Soil and Water Conservation District. Here's an example of our garden team doing some problem solving. So in the meadow, there is a low spot, and in both year 2 and 3, it remained soggy most of the year. And you can see how much the grass loved this environment. It has outcompeted almost all of the other plants in this area. So our garden team came up with a solution, and we did some work this past fall. With approval from our partners, including the Fair Board, we decided to set the grass back with some popple matting and to plant a tamarack sapling in this area. We also planted some elderberry shrubs and swamp milkweed, some lobelia. And you can see in the picture on the right that there were a few plants that were holding their own. That's mountain mint and smooth stem aster that we kind of pulled up through that mat to give them a chance to keep growing. And the garden team will continue monitoring this section. We're really optimistic that these added plants and the tamarack sapling will establish themselves well over the next few summers. So that's our meadow after 3 years. And let's see, I'm going to take you now to our rain garden. So this is back to 2022. The county fair board also gave us this little bit of land, and our what we call the bee hut is the building to the right that you just see a little bit of, and then to the left is another building used during the county fair that our crafts people put on, like spinning shows and stuff like that. So we're right in the middle of this boardwalk that gets some good traffic. And it was really a messy location, just overgrown and a big mess. And so using a skid steer, we took out some thick sod, and actually there was a bunch of rocks that we cleared out. And we even lowered that lowest area down a little bit more to create a rain garden. This was something the fair board really wanted this area to, and is appreciative of this area being developed. So in planting year 2022, we used plugs from the Soil and Water Conservation Rain Garden kits. And our initial funding was a grant through the Conservation District that the Bee Association was the grantee for. And you can see that this really is a good spot for a rain garden. You can see the puddling that really slows that water down as it flows through the fairgrounds into the next field. Our garden team during this very first year of planting also monitored for those really aggressive weeds that can take over quick. So this is the second year, 2023, or the first round of year, and there was some really good growth in the seedlings, and we were really pleased with the ponding. You can see how happy our iris and sedge are. The garden team was using its calendar to make sure someone was visiting the garden at least once a week to monitor for watering needs and weeds. Through sharing pictures in our group chat, we agreed not to be concerned with the very happy horsetail that you can see across that entire garden, but we did keep pulling out some of the more aggressive weeds like the thistle, dandelions, mustard, or some of the grass that wasn't intended to be there, clover, the bird's foot trefoil. And we just didn't want those plants to get a good start. So trying to get those tiny little seedlings to come up. So you can see we've made some progress. Here's our year 2. Most of the seedlings returned in the spring of 2024 and are getting bigger. We did lose some though over the winter, and we had room for some new plants to put in. We purchased some plugs and seedlings from an area native plant nursery, and we used some funds from the Bee Association again. And they've been a really foundational partner for this project. You can see in the pictures that the rain garden really is a good demonstration garden for our pollinators. It's just so it was really thriving even in that year 2. We also began engaging with our community in this year 2. Our master gardeners took a lead role in this work of creating and posting the plant signs in the rain garden and creating a listing of our plant varieties found in the garden. In 2024, our plant signs were simply laminated paper with both the Latin and common names, and we put a QR code in there to a Minnesota Wildflower Association's plant pages. The flare goers were really engaged with our rain garden, and they spoke highly of the signs and the handout. I think the third component of our community engagement was to have a master gardener available during the fair for a couple hours. Actually, that first year it was just a few hours, but they were available to answer questions and really just talk about pollinator habitat and the impact in our community. During this past summer, in 2025, this is our third growing year, the rain garden is beginning to actually really feel quite established. Our garden team had a little bit less work to do this summer, with the plants being more established, we had less concern about the water needs and less concern about weed pressure. And we've been talking about maybe in 2026 or next summer, shifting from maybe managing the weeds to just monitoring them. So managing being really actively pulling and clearing them out and reducing that competition, to monitoring for weed pressure. Again, maybe it's not so bad to have some clover and grass and dandelions in our pollinator garden, as long as the intended pollinator plants are able to be thriving. A side note also on just the sustainability of our project, this came up with Jillian's conversation too. The Bee Association has continued to be a really strong partner. This past year, they actually added a line item into their budget of $300 a year to help us, the garden team, purchase small pieces of equipment, get new plants to build out or establish a new plant, and also to help with those community engagement materials during Fair Week, like the signs or the handouts. So a little bit more about the signs regarding in our community engagement. We, all of the partners are really dedicated to the idea of sharing knowledge and inspiring action around pollinator habitat. And with those ideals in mind, we have made a commitment to do the signs, have handouts, and I hope increase our volunteer time. And so I want to share a little bit of this evolution. The first set of signs that you can see on the left were very low cost. So it was laminated paper printed on a home printer, created by volunteers. We used staples and spare wooden stakes and a hammer to get them into place, and that was pretty straightforward. We learned from those signs, and so we made them a little bit more simple, and we also fancied them up a bit. We used a yard sign, printed yard signs, and we did half size so that we could put them in this profile view, and we took off the QR code and used the QR code into the handout, so it became something that folks could take away with them. They were about $12 a piece, and so those signs are a little easier to read for folks from that boardwalk on the rain garden. We also created these small metal plant tags because us as gardeners are continuing to learn what all of these native plants are. There's about 26 varieties kind of crammed into that rain garden. And so we've left tags for us, and then we pull those fancy signs out in the fall after the fair's done and put those away until the next year. And this is what our handout basically looks like. Again, it's about 3 pages actually, but it has a lot of the information pulled from the Minnesota Wildflower Association pages, and that QR code takes folks directly to that page. And then on the right, you can see our kit basically for what we call a docent. The folks that come and put out a Ask Me a Question sign during Fair Week. And we've had in an increased number of hours that we're doing this with Master Gardeners being more comfortable talking to folks about the pollinator habitat and the native plants. I'm hoping we get to the point where we can even advertise our time in the fair catalog. You know, it'd be really great to say 11 o'clock on Friday, there'll be a pollinator garden conversation. So we're hoping that increases. And we provided some context for and some background for our docents so that they were comfortable asking the basic questions about how'd the garden start and who manages it, those kinds of things. All of our partners really do agree that it's great to have more pollinator habitat at our fairground, and we're all jazzed about sharing these demonstration gardens with our community. So thanks a lot for letting me share our story today. And if there's any questions, Tara will help us out.
We have lots of them for you, Cap. So a lot of questions, but I mean, I need to echo what folks are saying in the chat. Very impressive job for all the Hubbard count or the master gardeners that are just able to put so much time into this, not only in the coordination, but also the actual doing and the maintenance of it. So that's a lot of people to help coordinate. And that's one of the questions is how many people are on the total Carlton team?
Our garden team has 5 of us right now, and so interestingly, out of the 5, 4 of us are both master gardeners and beekeepers, and so we see each other at the bee association meetings and at the master gardener meetings, and so it's that's really nice. But we have one is just a beekeeper that loves the idea of pollinators, and she does a lot of native planting in her own home. So there is definitely the volunteers are folks that have a commitment around pollinator habitat.
That's amazing. Wow, very, very helpful to see that real world example. So you're putting it into practice.
I think, Tara, the other thing I would say is that of the 5 of us, in a summer from early June to late August really is how long that we spread out our weeks. That's only 3 weeks of responsibility a summer that we're really on call to go and take care of the garden. And I think each of us would say we spend in that week, maybe a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours, where we're kind of weeding and monitoring and trimming things up and watering and planting or whatever. And then we have all of us get together in the spring to do kind of a cleanup. It was maybe 2 or 3 hours as a group, and then another 2 or 3 hours together in the fall, where we're doing kind of put away and tidying up. And we love to go for a coffee or a tea afterwards to celebrate and debrief at the end of the year. So not a lot of hours. It's mostly what fun stuff to do anyway from our perspective.
That's awesome. That makes it a little bit less challenging to fit into your busy schedules. So it's doable.
Yeah.
That's perfect. We have lots of other questions about the actual technicality of actually doing it, but also before I do that, we had some folks that were interested in how did you just approach the fair board? You've talked about their involvement, or how did you get it started, initiated?
Well, the Bee Association really was the kicking off agency because they sought out the grant that kind of got the planting started, buying the plugs and the mix and then calling the gardeners and the beekeepers together. So that they were kind of the starting one. Master gardeners have joined in and been supportive with time and content generation for the community engagement piece. And the fair board was brought in at the time of that grant that the Bee Association with the master gardeners that were participating saying, hey, we'd like to do this. We think it's a good idea for our community. And the fair board, to Jillian's point, also said, that's great, but we don't have time to take care of a garden nor the expertise to do it. And we're like, but we have the time, we don't have the place. And so it was agreement through identifying that shared value. Like I said, everyone needs to get something out of it. And the fair board had 2 not very nice looking places that they didn't have the time or the energy to take care of. And so it was a win-win from that perspective, not a hard selling point.
Oh, good. That makes that easier to just get started when there's no pushback.
Mm-hmm.
We had some questions on maybe like, did you use seeds? It sounds like you did the plugs for all the rain garden. Did you use seeds for the prairie? And then if so, what is the cost? Would you say, like, just comment about the cost?
I'm afraid I don't remember the cost of our seeds. I think I can tell you the bag was about this big. It's not a ginormous meadow. I'd say, well, actually, I know this. It's about 80 feet by 40 feet is the size of that meadow section. So I guess it was probably about 2 to 4 pounds of seed mix. And again, it was part of our grant, so the Bee Association didn't outlay that. We received Soil and Water Conservation District funds to purchase the seed. So I'm sorry I don't know the exact number, but it was in the couple hundreds of dollars, not more than that.
And do you happen to remember how thick you planted it, how many seeds per square foot at all?
It came with instruction for us. So
Perfect.
the seed mixes often do give you a broadcasting amount that they plan for based on the mix that they have put together for you. So we did not design the mix. We purchased it pre-made.
Perfect. Nice and easy. And there's so many great mixes out there, so that's makes one less thing to think about.
Yeah.
And it one person commented about it being very thickly planted because of, and maybe it was just a great year for seeding, so just a lot more than a normal had germinated. But do you expect to have to do some thinning?
We haven't talked about that. I'll bring it back to our garden team though, and we'll be watching for it. We also have expertise that we can lean on through the Soil and Water Conservation District. We have some educator folks on prairie restoration, meadow, on native planting meadows. And so good observation. If somebody thinks that we're headed towards thinning, I'll be checking it out.
Awesome. Always something to do. So
yeah,
we don't want to give you another to-do thing, but yes, that's
well, what I thought was fascinating is how the garden has shifted in what's growing and what's blooming over those 3 years. You know, it wasn't surprising that the plant starting from seed didn't bloom the first year. And then the Rudbeckia was just amazing the second year. And then the third year, the Monarda just was everywhere. And there was still the Rudbeckia black-eyed Susans, but not to the extent that it was the first year. And then you could see all the other plants that were starting to be stronger and bigger. So I was expecting the Liatris to be blooming next year and get some asters out. And there's just a lot more to happen. So I'm thinking the thinning kind of takes care of itself as the plants become more larger plants and take up more space as each plant survives and thrives.
That makes total sense. The ebb and flow of nature, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really important point that you talk about too, is that each year is going to look a little different, and it might
Mm-hmm.
take a little bit of time for things to germinate and get established. So I think that's an important point for folks to hear that maybe haven't started it, that they have to be patient to see
Yeah.
the full effect. And each year is so different. So
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome. So a great point to echo. So we also had some questions on wildlife, rabbit damage, any other animals that are eating your baby plants?
Yes, I mentioned the deer, and they were basically came in late fall and then early spring. And so we have put up a physical fence for this to keep them out in this, particularly the spring. So we had some deer browse in the meadow, also in the rain garden, but we decided not to put up a fence there because there's the boardwalk, and they just didn't seem to spend as much time in the rain garden. We've had other critters. We have some rabbit damage. I think there's a groundhog, I'm pretty sure, somewhere nearby. But that's one of the reasons to have a little bit of a budget to continue to buy some of those replacement plants and have that just be part of the deal, where we've got critters that are also munching a little bit.
Sure.
We had some lovely frogs, not that they hurt things, but that was some really cool wildlife that we had in our rain garden.
Perfect. I think I'll do one more question just so we can get to Sue and Sally's. We have a couple of questions that I think would be beneficial for all of the the groups to answer, so I'll save those towards the end. But I know this is a limitation that you've talked about, Cap, actually before. So what happens to the site when it isn't Fair Week? Like, is this a public space that sees regular visitors?
Well, it is in the sense that our county fairgrounds is used for other events really all summer. But we don't highlight our demonstration garden during those other fairground events, just during the fair week. So it is very much of a focused time for interacting specifically about that garden as a demonstration garden with our community during fair week. I think we have some opportunity, to grow our interaction with the community, with our schools. Perhaps we can do some work. And this is where the Master Gardeners are really, it's one of their strengths, is to figure out how to engage with the community and do education. So I'm hoping as the garden becomes more established and we as gardeners become more fluent with talking about the pollinators habitat and the native plants, that we'll have opportunity for doing more community engagement.
Perfect. Fabulous point. Thank you so much, Kath. Great, another great highlight, but very different than the Flutterfest and the Gooseberry Park, but still so impactful and in a public space. So that it's like a whole different, utilizing what you have in your area is a really cool piece. So thank you so much, Cap. I think all the little emojis flying for you
Thank
of
you.
your project. Now we'll transition to Sue and Sally. Perfect.
Welcome to a 10-year trip down Victoria Road or up. We work in both directions, always with our safety vests on. We are Sue Light and Sally McNamara, Dakota County Master Gardener volunteers, sharing our experience developing a native roadside planting in Mendota Heights, Dakota County. Begun in 2015, this long learning experience has involved a lot of committed people, about 150 volunteer hours a year, and extensive learning as plants have agendas not always aligned with ours. Cindy Johnson, a master gardener, lives across the street from this eyesore. Okay. The neighborhood was offended by the ugliness of the rock gutter along the street, which was quite effective at collecting rubbish and growing weeds. There is a very busy walking path next to this, which was another reason to improve the ambiance of the road. An additional motivation for this project was that in 2015, the city of Mendota Heights designated itself as a pollinator-friendly city. When the city planned to rework the street and gutters along Victoria Road, Cindy and neighbors petitioned for installing a prairie planting along this long block with the support of the local master gardeners. This connected directly to their pollinator-friendly designation. A partnership was organized with the city and the installation was done in 2015. A few years later, the city hired a natural resources coordinator who has been the primary partner between the city and the master gardeners. We want to emphasize that the project is successful only because the city has consistently been a good partner. The city removed the boulders and the other material, followed by grading before the initial seeding in 2015. The initial installation in 2015 was a planting of a Minnesota Department of Transportation roadside seed mix containing 9 grasses and 19 forbs, which are flowering plants. We can share this list can be shared with interested participants, but the mix may have changed in the last 10 years. No plugs were planted at that time. In keeping with the last presentation, the first year was a sea of yellow rudbeckia, which is now very sporadic. Based on our records, we identified 8 of the grasses and 9 of the flowering plants 2 years later. For most of us volunteering on the project, it was our initiation to gardening with native plants. We had a lot to learn. don't move. Oh, I need that one. Okay, you're one ahead of me. Canada wild rye is one of the first to establish, but it fades out over time, making space for longer-lived species. We had to learn that many natives take at least a season to germinate and then maybe several more to flower. We learned that the planting looks different every year as the life cycles of plants create diversity. In this picture, you have wild petunia, purple and white prairie clover, coreopsis, Canada wild rye over here hanging out, stiff goldenrod. Oh, this is the stiff goldenrod. We'll talk about that later. And there's a Siberian elm seedling right here. This is sort of the bane of our existence right here. We'll talk about that later too. Over time, we have. You need to move.
I know I can't see that.
Over time, we have added seeds and planted forb plugs to improve diversity. Note in this picture from 2023 that the monarda is gaining ground. So the monarda is in the back. We have butterfly weed in the front. Little blue stem hanging over the street and clovers arching over the street. Stiff goldenrod right in the front, way front, and a vervain over to the left front. So quite a bit of diversity. This roadside would be impossible to maintain without the city's commitment to our partnership. They help pay for the seeds and plugs when needed and handle all of our debris removal after our volunteer teams weed and thin. We have tarps full of stuff we leave at City Hall for them to make disappear. This is a really big deal for us. At the beginning of end of each season, the city contracts with a restoration company to manage a 3-year maintenance cycle. First year, mow and collect the cut vegetation. Second year, mow and leave the vegetation. Third year, burn the entire site. Notice that there is a natural fire break on both sides of the burn area. One side is the road and the other side a bike walk path. The burn crew is spraying water around the telephone poles before and after the fire goes through. Each section was burned completely before they moved to the next section. Under the conditions of the day, the process took about 45 minutes. A prescribed burn is an important maintenance tool. Fire has a dramatic effect on a prairie. Plants are more vigorous, grow taller, and produce more flowers and seeds following a burn. The growing season is extended because the blackened soil warms sooner in the spring. The warmer soil also favors prairie plants over cool season invasive weeds. Fire controls trees and woody shrubs. Dry prairies like this one can take as long as 10 years to accumulate enough litter to burn. This one has been burned twice. And I believe this burn was done in April. After the fire, plant growth is surprisingly rapid. Rudbeckia seeds scattered after the fire germinated immediately. Where we created space by thinning other species, the little blue stem grass has happily filled in. In the first years, it was sparse at best. This is giving the roadside the look of a rolling prairie, exactly as we had hoped. We suspect that the burn favored little blue stem spread.
Okay, so we have smushed together 10 years of learning into this 15-minute presentation, but we did want to highlight some of our main challenges. Our weed challenges is one of our biggest challenge. The worst is Siberian elm. The seeds come from a large Siberian elm tree on the other side of the bike path. Most of us are vigilant about pulling small buckthorn seedlings, and the other usual suspects are crown vetch. And the crown vetch was planted on a roadside about 10 years ago and has, spread. We have thistle, And we have annuals like foxtail that keep us busy on taking the seed heads off in August and September. But since the little blue stem and the Cytodes grama are filling in, we have less foxtail. We noticed by their movement that some plants are fairly tolerant of road salt because we have a lot of road salt on the roadside. Some of the examples are pictured here, the world milkweed, wild petunia, and prairie clover. And also we have ironweed, coreopsis, and stiff goldenrod that find their way to the roadside. We have some thugs. This has been mentioned before, and this is what happens after a few years. Monarda and stiff goldenrod have been taking over, and we spend a lot of time pulling the monarda out and by the roots, or at least removing their seed heads. Same with stiff goldenrod. One problem we encounter is maintaining a lower plant height on each side of the block for visibility at the intersections. Many of our native plants grow too tall for the intersections, so it's a continual project to add short plants and remove the tall ones. Here are a few that we found work well on the intersections for better visibility. Butterfly milkweed, Cytodes grama, wild petunia, as well as coreopsis and prairie clover. This summer, after we ripped out a lot of stiff goldenrod and monarda, we planted a variety of plugs to fill in the space to better compete with the species we took out. We flagged them all to find them for watering because one of our challenges is there is no access to water on this roadside. So we end up bringing gallons of water in milk jugs from home. The neighborhood has had many great responses to the prairie planting, appreciating it so much that some volunteer with us to maintain the garden. Some thank us for the work as they walk by, and some even bring us cookies. That said, some see it as a weed patch. Some walk through it for a quicker way to cross the street, and we have even seen a landscaping truck drive right through the prairie to reach the backyard behind the trees there. One last challenge is who will be the stewards of the space when we are too old or move? Succession planning is an important conversation to have with your partner. In our case, it's the city of Mendota Heights. How to keep the partnership going beyond the original participants? Or what happens when one of the partners needs to pull out? One solution is to encourage new leadership from each season's volunteers. The city can encourage volunteers by publicly recognizing the important contribution of this project to the city. We have Welcome to the Prairie Nights to acquaint the neighbors with the planting. We do our garden maintenance on different days so that we can engage with a wide variety of residents and volunteers. Volunteers come from the master gardeners in the area and also interested community residents. This unique native planting is an attractive place to spend time with like-minded plant enthusiasts. This is a great resource for native plant gardeners. This was published in 2024, and you should have this book if you're serious about gardening with native plants. It catalogs a wide variety of native plants with photos of them in all life stages. Native plant gardeners can use this guide to identify plant seedlings so they don't pull them out thinking they are weeds. It also has great pictures of the seed stage of the plant so you know when to harvest them for next year's planting. And it gives the plant species life expectancy. Plants don't live forever. For example, the life expectancy of a large flowered beard tongue is 3 to 5 years, while Culver's root lives 5 to 10 years. Many of us have adopted the use of natives in our own and other gardens as a result of this hands-on education we've received. This has motivated our neighbors to do the same. So our little prairie on Victoria Road has spread beyond the roadside into the community. The numerous native gardens welcome many more beneficial insects to our city. This slide and the next three show a few of the pollinators who have found our Victoria Road planting. The roadside may not be a complete pollinator habitat. This darling bumblebee loves the nectar and pollen, but can it nest here? The issues are the narrowness of the patch, mowing, burning, and residents who spray their yard with herbicides on either side, and car traffic. While this particular prairie strip might not be the perfect pollinator habit, it does provide a model for our community. And we have seen rusty patch bumblebees, our endangered bee, for several years on this patch. This project is not a casual commitment. These plants and pollinators they attract are the result of a 10-year project with an average of 150 volunteer hours per year. We applaud the City of Mendota Heights for their continued support of our project and our committee for staying the course. Strong leadership is crucial to the success of the project. As you can see, this native planting is thriving. Recently, a neighbor a half block downstream of this planting stopped to explain how his backyard pond had gone from green to clean over the last several years, and he thinks it's due to the lack of rain runoff from the street. You can see this as a slope, so with the boulders and the weeds, the rain just really went fast down the hill. The long-rooted prairie plants are performing the water absorption service for which they are known. This is a beautiful picture of just last fall in October. And we want to thank the City of Mendota Heights, our Master Gardener volunteers, and our community volunteers for making this project so successful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue and Sally. That is the goal. I think everyone is thinking about when we talk about all the details about pollinator habitats, it's what is this going to look like in 10 years? And that tells you how much commitment it takes and how much dedication. But I think it is very important that folks get a visual aspect of this is what it can be in long term, that this isn't just a fleeting project that we do and then it's done, on to the next thing. So really appreciate, not only your efforts in partnering with other organizations such as the city, but it is very crucial that you've explained this to everyone. So thank you so much, Sally and Sue. We have lots of questions on particularly the burning. I think folks are really interested in that, how it might not be great for every situation, but in your situation that it's been working really well. Did you ever consider doing like a third each year as far as the burning? So basically to allow for any invertebrate survival and repopulation, or has that been a discussion at all?
It has been a discussion, and because the strip is so narrow, it's not there's not, it wouldn't be worth it for someone to come out and burn for that short piece of land.
Sure.
And we want to observe a lot of wildlife in that strip, which is why we brought that up about it not being the perfect habitat, like the better in the last one. One thing I'd like to add to those people who are working on the projects, take more pictures than we did. We did not document
We skipped a few years.
It's hard. You get doing the work, so it's hard to document the work. But
about 10 years down the line.
I'm glad we've seen, yes, what you have. Yes. And who did you use for the birding?
We have used it's a division of MNL. It's their fire, it's their burn division that we used
Perfect.
last year.
Perfect. Nice local group to do it.
Mhm.
Um, do you think that the burnings they take care of the tree seedlings that might be unwanted in the garden?
Well, they really do a good job of knocking them back. Yeah.
Perfect.
It's just hard. There are so many seedlings and a number of invasive trees on the opposite side, so it's a real battle.
Sure. And maybe you've heard discussions about this, or maybe you've quantified this yourselves, but do you know the comparison for what the city spends on the maintenance of the prairie area versus if they would just mow it? See if there's any savings there.
I think their big expense is just hiring this company to either mow and hay or burn every year. They do when we ask them if we need seed money, we ask them for seed money. Mowing, I don't know. I think it's probably less expensive to mow than it is to hire a company once a year.
Sure.
Yeah,
But it's not it's more important to have the model for pollinator habitat garden.
in a pollinator-friendly city.
Right.
And we actually have another garden in front of City Hall that we maintain as well. So we're trying to be a model, and they're supportive of that.
And do you know if any of these projects have been set up on iNaturalist at all, if you're familiar with that app? We had a couple of folks that were wondering about just engaging the public in a different format and then documenting the results that you've seen here.
We have documented on iNaturalist casually or Bumblebee Watch. If we're out there and we see something, we'll take a picture of it and record it on those sites, but nothing
Structural,
yeah,
formal, no.
yeah, just casual, ad hoc.
And this is a good question that I'll ask all the groups is, have you seen an increase in pollinators over the years in those locations?
Oh, we definitely have. Yeah, we have a lot. We have probably a nest of black and gold bumblebees somewhere because during a few weeks in the summer, we see probably 100 of them in any one time we go out there.
I'd like to open that up to Cap and Jill and Sydney. Have you guys seen more in your locations?
Yeah, I think, well, Sydney could probably speak to also the other pocket prairies that she's done. I think too, people have seen the monarchs and everything come back from that massacre, 5 years ago, and we finally see them returning. So that's just makes it even more important that we, keep supporting it.
Yeah, 100%. Throughout the different pocket prairies that I had mentioned, throughout the city parks in Moorhead. I have a website where I, throughout the years, have taken pictures of the amount of pollinators, and like habitat payoff that's occurred in those spaces. Just such an influx of, all different types of pollinators, that wouldn't have been there at all had it just remained grass. So that's the really cool part is knowing that they wouldn't have been there otherwise.
Yeah, I would say the same. You recall the picture of what our meadow looked like before and after. And when you walk through the meadow path in August during Fair Week, you can almost feel the buzzing that's going on in that meadow. And the rain garden too went from being just basically a monoculture of grass to having just an abundance of diverse food sources and I think some really good nesting sources too. So yeah, lots and lots of added pollinators.
That's awesome to actually see it pay off all the work that you guys are doing. That's very rewarding to hear. Uh, Maybe some other advice that you would give to folks that maybe uh, when they're communicating with neighbors or other partners or just out in the community of how how to justify that it's not a weed bed and it's a native prairie planting or a native rain garden. Do you have any suggestions for how people can communicate that at all?
Signage does help, you know. We identify it as that, so at least people can see that.
And ours also is a very public roadside with a lot of foot traffic and bike traffic. And when we're out there working, and because we wear our safety vests, they know that we're, up to something, and they'll stop to ask us questions. And part of our job is not just to pull weeds, but to engage with the community and the people who are asking questions. And we have one volunteer that rode his bike by one day 4 years ago, and he has come to every one of our
Work
sessions since then.
And we
Yeah.
communicate with a shared spreadsheet. I think we need to add that the notes that was mentioned, I think by Kat, perhaps that would be a good thing that we could do.
Yeah, having the volunteers organized a little bit really helps us be more effective. I think the part about helping our community members understand the benefit of messy looking native pollinator planting shifts paradigms around what a garden is. And so it's not meant to be, it's supposed to be diverse, and there's beauty in that. And so helping people kind of shift their expectations about what a garden looks like helps people, I think, feel value around and appreciate the beauty that's there versus the tidy rose garden type expectation of folks. So I think it's just a matter of the shifting that image of what a garden is and what's beautiful to help folks connect it with the value of the habitat.
In our city,
Go ahead.
the city supports rain gardens. Whenever they redo a street, they offer the neighbors, the residents, rain gardens. And like this spring, we planted 10 rain gardens and they're mostly planted with native plants, and so they're all dotted around the city. And we're there to help with maintenance questions as they move on. So that's been a way to spread, like you say, the this is a garden that's working for nature, not just for our eyes, kind of a thing.
I was just gonna add, I think if you're able and have the capacity to also host an event, like we did in Moorhead for Flutterfest, to invite folks in and teach them like one-on-one and things like that is also a good way to communicate with the communities like that are directly near and surrounding those prairie spaces is really fun.
Well, you've reached over 1,700 registrants for this one series. So hopefully, whether they are fellow master gardeners that can maybe take these ideas and run with them themselves, or as continuing community members that can continue spreading this information and this word that all the advice that you guys have offered here today. So that was our last question. I want to thank you all so much for your expertise. You can tell it really shines in the culmination of the accomplishments that you've achieved with these pollinator habitats, whether they're established last year or 10 years ago. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And I'd also like to thank Heather and Elaine, our past two speakers, and because all 3 days you all covered just so many useful topics throughout the whole week. And I'm just really hoping that all of the attendees can help use this information to help continue promoting practices to support pollinators and in your communities, wherever you are in Minnesota or beyond. So we've learned it from a lot of different angles, from the research to the plant selection to boots on the ground. So I'm glad we were able to learn together and just kind of see how these pieces connect. Thank you to our audience. This group is always such a joy to engage with. You could always see the emojis flying. And since this is our 5th year hosting it, it's just been incredible to see the interest and the momentum that we've garnered over these last 5 years. Like I said, 1,700 registrants. That just tells you the amount of enthusiasm in folks that want to make a difference. So we just really, truly appreciate your enthusiasm, your questions, and your commitment to pollinators. So as I mentioned earlier, once I close out the webinar, your browser will open to a short 5-question survey about just the overall series. I just really appreciate your time, just taking a few minutes to share your feedback, and it just really helps us improving and expanding this program. So, and remember, as a thank you, I'll randomly select two participants or survey respondents to receive a $25 gift card. So I'll be drawing on February 27th. So about a month that you have to do that. So just make sure to do the survey before then. As a reminder, all this information from today and all the past days will all be emailed, as well as other programs you might be interested in from the University of Minnesota Extension. So all that will be going out in the email on Friday. So wait, just be patient for a few days and I'll give you everything that you want to know on Friday. So we hope to see you next year in our next pollinator series, the 6th one. So thank you all again and take care.